Welcome everyone to AGI's GeoWebinar series. My name is Heather Holton and I will be moderating today's Geoscience Currents Discussion webinar titled AGI's National Geoscience Student Exit Survey, the Spring 2012 Results. Now is a great time to download the currents from AGI's website if you haven't done so already. Before we get started, I want to walk everyone through a few of our webinar basics. We will be recording the webinar today and we will be posting this content for later viewing on AGI's GeoWebinar website. For audio clarity, we will be keeping all participants muted for this session. You can ask questions by typing them into the question or chat box on your webinar panel. You can type your question in at any point during the webinar, and we will be answering those questions during the panel discussion. In today's webinar, we'll be having Carolyn Wilson from AGI's Workforce Program. The presentation will be followed by a panel discussion where the questions from participants will be addressed by our speaker. Again, you can ask questions by typing them into the question or the chat box on your webinar panel. You can type your question in at any point during the webinar. And with that, I'll turn the slides over to Carolyn.
Thanks, Heather, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm very excited to share my work with y'all on the exit survey and the results that we just collected this past April. So to give you a little background on the exit survey, this project has been in the works for a few years. There have been discussions held at workshops, some work that we have done. We've realized it's something that's been needed in our community. A lot of the data that's collected on career trajectories and student preparedness in college will include the geosciences, but can be hard to pull that information out directly, and it would make the most sense for us to do our own survey of our own community. So as you can see, the purpose for the survey was to ascertain the relative experiences in school and immediate career trajectories of students graduating with geoscience degrees. And so we developed questions that will hopefully tackle these objectives. To identify the necessary knowledge and skills acquired while in school that aided the students in securing employment upon graduation, identify student decision points for entering geoscience fields, identify the geoscience fields that students pursue in undergraduate and graduate school, identify employment preferences and realities of graduating students, collect information about salary projections for entry positions in different geoscience careers, and demonstrate the value of geoscience careers to future students, the institutions, and employers, and finally, to establish a benchmark to perform longitudinal studies of geoscience graduates down the line. So we did a pilot in the spring of 2011. We handpicked 32 departments to participate. 14 actually did. And you can see the distribution of these departments on the U.S. map. We received 103 total responses, 11 of which were partial, 92 completed responses, and 67 undergraduates, 23 master's students, and 2 doctoral students. So it was really great to see the response that we got. And it was completed, pilot was completed before I started working here. And so when I showed up, it was given to me to do a second pilot and really build on what the first pilot did. So for our second pilot, we really wanted to build on the feedback and experiences from the first pilot. And major focus was to expand the scope and participation in the survey. So we selected departments. Many of them participated last year or had seen presentations at GSA and AGU about the exit survey in the fall. And others, we did some more hand selection. So we sent out invitations to 81 different departments, and 58 actually agreed to participate. This year we provided department incentives for participation, including they would get the aggregated data for their department as long as at least 3 students participated in the survey. And we allowed them to add up to 5 questions that would only be asked of their students. And so if there was any information they wanted to gather from just their students, they would have that information. We used an online tool called Line Survey, made it very easy to set up and very easy to use, very smooth transition, and allowed us to kind of conditionalize the question. So if you said no to a certain question, then you didn't get the follow-up question for it. And it was requested that we email this out in April instead of May, and in order to get full participation from the departments. So we received We received answers from 46 different departments, and all of the data that you will see is only from our full responses. We received 294 full responses. 233 of those were from undergraduates, 40 were from master's students, and 21 from doctoral students. So we increased our response rate quite a bit for the second pilot, which was what we wanted to do. So I was very excited to see that. The map shows distribution of departments. The red dots are the departments that participated at their location. And the shading is the number of students from each state that participated. So we're missing participation from the central portion of the U.S., so hopefully we'll get some of that in the next iteration of the exit survey. We had a lot of participation from Pennsylvania and Texas. So with our responses, 79% were bachelor students, 14% were master's students, and 7% were doctoral students. To give you some demographics of our students, kind of how it broke down, the gender breakdown was right at 50% for our undergraduates, and then we had about 20% more male students than female students in our graduate population. Citizenship status in the U.S., the majority of the students that participated were U.S. citizens, but we did have a few temporary and permanent residents. And the race and ethnicity, 84% were Caucasian. And you can see we had 5% Latino and 1% Asian, but I had to lump the rest of our underrepresented minorities in a single category because there was only 4%, and the percentages for each one were too small to separate out. The educational background of students that we surveyed, about 50% of all of our participants took an earth science class in high school, and a little less than that participated in some sort of extracurricular activity. In community college, we had a large number of undergraduates that attended at least one course in community college, but as you can see, it wasn't a geoscience course normally. The percentage is a bit lower for graduates, and less than half of them took a geoscience course in community college. This year we added a question on quantitative skills, and it was apparent that nearly all of our students had taken Calc 1 and a good majority Calc 2, but beyond that the undergraduates drop off with the higher quantitative skills, and the graduates kind of vary as the classes got more difficult or they changed levels. For financing education, we asked a question about financial aid, the sources for financial aid. And we found out that 86% of PhD students, 90% of master's students, and 78% of bachelor students took some sort of financial aid for their schooling. What's interesting to point out on this graph is our percentages for TAs and RAs are expectedly high for our graduate students, but the student loans was kind of interesting. It's kind of expected to have a large percentage of undergraduates taking out student loans, but I was surprised by the graduate students, with 30% of masters and nearly 20% of PhD students taking out some sort of student loans to help finance education or living expenses during their time in school. This may look familiar to those of y'all that saw our currents. For those of you that haven't, please go and download it. But the decision points for majoring in geosciences, we saw that really the two most important decision points that the students pointed out were that they were previously interested in the subject, or that they became interested as a result of a geoscience introductory course in college or university. And this goes well with the other question we asked, the point at which the students decided to major in the geosciences. If you see our undergraduates, a lot of them decided to major either before beginning college or during their first and second year of undergraduate. The master's students were kind of across the board on decision making, but I thought it'd be interesting to point out that we had quite a high percentage of PhD students that decided to major in the geosciences after receiving their undergraduate degree, as well as before beginning college. We asked about their field experience while in school, and just to give you a little bit of background, we defined a field camp as an academic program lasting for 4 or more weeks in the summer that is primarily focused on field tools and methods. A field course was defined as a course with a field component primarily covering field methods and experimentation that utilizes at least 1/2 of the total class. And a field experience were field trips, field work, or any other time in the field that was not included in those other 2 definitions. And what I find interesting in this graph is that if the students took a field camp, then they also took another field experience. And the majority of the students that took a field camp also took a field course and a field experience, as you can see in all 3 different field experiences category. We also had a high percentage of students that took a field course and a field experience. So a lot of our students, nearly all of our students had some sort of field experience during their education. We also asked about research experiences. And we asked about if they participated in individual and faculty research. We counted it all. So what I found interesting in this one is we have a high percentage of undergraduates and then masters that have up to 2 research experiences, but then you see this ginormous jump with the PhD students to 6+ research experiences. Now for the methods that students use for their personal research, they could click more than 1 selection, so that's why all of these percentages look fairly high. I think this one will be interesting to track in the future as we continue with this, because I was looking specifically at computer-based research as compared to lab-based research and field-based research, and you see a high percentage of PhDs doing lab-based research and computer-based, but less with field-based. And you see a higher percentage of master students doing computer-based research than lab-based and field-based. So I'd like to see how and if that changes as we collect more data every year. I think we asked about internship experiences, and I think this will be another interesting one to track because we know that having an internship will help you give you a big boost when you start looking for jobs, to have that connection and that experience. But as you can see, the majority of our students did not have an internship while they were in school. So after ascertaining their background and their educational skills and knowledge, we started asking about what their future plans were. So the first area we're going to look at is their future plans in graduate school. So we had, for our undergraduates, 84% of our undergraduates that are pursuing a graduate degree are pursuing a master's degree, 13% a PhD, and 2% pursuing an MAT. 1% weren't sure. As far as our graduates go, 6% of those pursuing a graduate degree are pursuing another master's, and 94% are pursuing a PhD. And as you can see in the table, these are the percentages of students planning on going to graduate school in the field that they're interested in studying. That other category includes things like civil engineering, education, human resources, urban planning, public health, and social sciences. We next asked about their plans for pursuing a position in within the geoscience career world. And so these are the students that were seeking employment in the geosciences but have not yet accepted a position. And so all the percentages are based on the number of students that are seeking employment here in the business sector's graph. And we found that 33% of the doctoral students were seeking employment, 40% of the master's students, and 48% of the undergraduate students were also seeking employment. And they could click more than one sector, so the interest was kind of wide. We saw high interest in environmental, in government, federal and state level, in consulting, in oil and gas, and for graduate students in research institutes. So these are, this is displaying the information for students that actually accepted the position in the geosciences. So we had 40% of our doctoral students, 30% of our master's students, and 17% of our undergraduate students that at the time they took the survey had accepted the position. And in this question, they could only select one business sector, and it's very clear to see that for undergraduates and graduates, oil and gas has a clear, clearly high percentage over the other sectors. And then for graduate students, four-year universities were where they were finding jobs. I then mapped the location where they found the jobs. And again, the shading is the number of students that found jobs in those states. And what I want to point out is, as I said earlier when we were talking about the participation, I said that Texas and Pennsylvania had the highest number of students that participated. But as you can see on this graph, Pennsylvania doesn't have quite as many students that found jobs in that state, whereas in Texas they were able to secure jobs within the state of Texas. We also asked them how they were able to find the job, what helped them the most in finding the job, and the highest percentage was through their own network. But we also saw a higher percentage with faculty referrals for finding positions and networking for the graduate students. And finally, we asked them about their future plans if they were seeking employment outside of the geosciences. And this graph is a little different because the numbers were so small that I couldn't really convert to percentages. And again, they could choose any sector that they were looking for a job. So instead of doing percentages, I did number of students. And so we saw 5% of the master's students and 15% of the undergraduate students are seeking a job outside of the geosciences. The students that have actually accepted jobs outside of geosciences, 5% of our graduate students and 6% of our undergraduates had actually accepted a job. And again, the sectors are kind of across the board. And so we wanted to know why they were looking for a job outside of the geosciences. And these are, we got a lot of responses, but these are the ones that I picked up because they each highlight something slightly different. To serve my country, have not yet found a geosciences position. And then here's one that I thought was interesting. Historic preservation is interdisciplinary, and I wanted to use my geology background in order to be a materials conservator. Our position here is if you use geology or geosciences in your position, then we're going to consider you a member of the geoscience workforce. And it would be, we need to do a better job of making it clear what kind of jobs fall into the geoscience workforce. The next one, I want to explore other options for a career path before I continue my education in geosciences. Next one, I decided that I would like to be a teacher. And again, we find teaching to also fall in the geoscience workforce, especially if you're teaching earth science in your classroom. And finally, I found a career path that was better suited for my skills and interest in the geosciences. So what are we planning to do next? What are our next steps? Well, first, I am disseminating my information on the second pilots like I am today. I'll also be presenting at GSA and AGU this information, some slightly different information, pointing out different things, and just really advertising the existence of this survey, because we really want your participation and to really get a good look at the interests and thoughts of our graduating students. I'm going to have some conversations with the participating departments within the next couple of weeks to kind of learn about the good and the bad and the ugly of how this last deployment went, see what we can fix, what we can improve on. I already have some edits, additions, subtractions to the questions list to make it better to kind of tighten it up and really get to what we're trying, the information which we really want. And connecting with more departments to participate. We want everyone that's interested to participate. Something we're adding this year is incentives for students. So we have departmental incentives, but I think we need to add student incentives, which haven't been completely decided upon, but in order to get them to participate. And I will be starting to develop a longitudinal study to look at how these careers develop over time. One of the questions we asked in both the first and second pilots were if they were willing to allow us to contact them in the future to participate in a longitudinal study. And we had over 200 students say yes. So I have a running list of students that are ready and willing to participate. And so I just need to develop the survey tool and really look at how we want to put that out there for the longitudinal study. So with that, I really want to open this up for questions and discussion and see what thoughts you have about what I've just presented.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. We do have several questions rolling in from the audience. The first is from Pranoti Asher at AGU. She says, your data about the different types of research experiences, whether computer-based or field-based, is interesting. There could be a relationship between the type of geoscience field that they are involved in. For instance, someone getting a degree in atmospheric science may be doing a lot of modeling rather than doing field work. So your question is, can you tie the subdiscipline of geology into these various groups for research experiences?
I actually might be able to, because I did ask them to describe their research briefly, and I haven't had a chance to go through all of those responses, but that was one of the things I was planning on doing, was seeing if I was able to tie the subject area with the type of methods they were using for their research.
Okay, great. The second question we have is from William Barkhouse, and he asks, in each category, less than 50% of students were looking for employment in the geosciences. Do you know where they're going?
I'm sorry, we're looking for employment out.
We're looking for employment in the geosciences.
Okay.
Do you know where they were going?
Instead of the geosciences?
No, inside of the geosciences.
Oh, inside of the geosciences.
Yeah, did they indicate where they were being employed when they were going into the geosciences?
That question was available. So there's some other questions that weren't presented here. The industry was there, which is up there. We also asked for the company they're getting a job with, the salary that they're receiving, and any additional compensation, and if they had interned with the company beforehand. So I do have some of that information. It's just not presented in this presentation.
Okay, great. We have one question from Dallas Rhodes. He asks, what are the departmental incentives for participation?
Well, the big one was being able to add your own questions to the survey. So we had a few departments in this past one add 5 questions. So we limited it up to 5 just to test it out and see how it worked. And what we would like to do is, we know some of the departments already do exit surveys or are connected with organizations that do exit surveys, and so one of my future tasks is to connect with these organizations and talk to these departments and let them know that they can tie their exit survey with ours and ask their students a specific set of questions just for their students. And that got a high level of excitement amongst the participating departments in this past pilot.
Mm-hmm. Great. And to follow up on that, are there any requirements or restrictions on the types of questions departments can develop for their own sections?
That would be something that you and I would probably have to talk about. I noticed some slight issues with departments that asked only for short answer questions, because we want to keep this survey 15 to 20 minutes tops. We don't want to lose students' interest halfway through. And so we would like these questions to be button pushing, yes or no, Likert scale. However, with maybe 1 or 2 short answer if you really need it.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. So when you move forward with the exit survey, how many departments are you hoping will participate, and then what is your target for the total number of responses?
For spring 2013, we're going for a full nationwide deployment. We want anyone and everybody. Realistically, I'm hoping to double the number of departments that participated in this last time in next year.
Okay, great. And this came in from Julianne Snyder, and she says, as a museum professional, I was particularly interested in the response of the student pursuing materials conservation. Do you know which universities offering courses and degrees in conservation or museum studies actively recruit geoscience students?
I do not. That's an interesting question that I can look into further.
Yeah, we'll have to get back to you on that one. Pranoti asks, do you know if department chairs or department coordinators offer incentives to their own students to participate?
I'm not aware of any. I know we got high percentage of participation from the departments that had the students take surveys while they were in a class. And that actually occurred with departments that included questions because they really wanted responses from their students. So they chose a class, or they had some sort of capstone class for their students, and on the last day they all took the survey together, and I got really high percentages from that. But as far as department level incentives, I'm not aware of any, but I mean, I could be wrong. We'll see what happens when I talk to the departments next week.
Great. Alan asked, did you say that the PowerPoint was going to be available on the AGI website?
The presentation will be available on the AGI website.
Yes, this whole entire webinar, including the discussion, will be rendered and posted available on the webinar website of AGI Workforce. So you will be able to view that once we get it up online. And Dallas Rhodes has a question. Do you provide feedback directly to the department on their students' responses? We asked a question. I'll preface by saying we asked a question to the students if they're willing to share their full responses with the department as well as their contact info. And for the students that said yes to either of those questions, we will be providing that. I have it all separated out. I'm about to send it out to the departments next week. For the departments that had more than three or more responses, I will be doing aggregations of the responses to give that to the departments as well. Okay, great. And those are all the questions we have. I'll give you guys a couple more seconds if there are any other questions you would like Carolyn to answer for you. Is there anything else coming in? It does not look like it. All right, so those are all the questions we have for today's webinar. If you do have any questions that were not addressed today, you can email them to Carolyn Wilson at cwilson@agiweb.org.
Also, if your department would like to participate in the next exit survey, please email me too.
Yes, that was a shameless plug, obviously. And as I said earlier, we will be posting today's recorded webinar on the GeoWebinar site soon. And you can visit this website. It is www.agiweb.org/workforce/webinars. And we want to thank Carolyn very much for speaking today. And we have one more small announcement. Just as a reminder for those of you who are attending GSA this year in Charlotte, North Carolina, AGI is co-sponsoring a Geoscience Careers Networking Lunch, and it will be held on Monday, November 5th. It will start at 11:30 a.m. and registration opens at 11 o'clock. So if you're interested in learning more about this opportunity, please contact me at hrh@agiweb.org. And with that, we are finished with the webinar, and we thank everyone for attending.